Alright, so we're doing 7.1 day 2 today. It's going to be a lot of work with our calculator at first, so make sure you have that out and it's ready to go. So our objectives for today are to describe the general shape of linear, quadratic, cubic, and quartic functions. We're going to sketch functions in standard form using calculators to find maximum values, and we're going to graph functions in factored form. Now we're not really going to be working with the max and min values today. We'll be working with those in a later date. But the rest of it's what we're doing today. So these are the functions that we've learned today. Now over here we see our linear function, we've got our quadratic function, absolute value, exponential, and we have our logarithmic. So all of those are ones that you've seen so far. So we're going to use our calculator to figure out what these cubic functions look like. We want to get the general shape of what they look like. We're going to focus on these last two here. Now the first one, they're all going to kind of look somewhat similar, but I wanted to plug these into our calculator because we're going to talk about them a little bit more than we would with that first one. So let's get to it. We're going to plug in this second equation here, the x plus 1 times x minus 2 times x plus 3 into our calculator. So we should be plugging it into the y equals, and it should look something like this. Now this is the fancy color one. Actually, it goes on my computer. It's pretty sweet. Right, so that's what it should look like when you plug it into your calculator. And we're going to go hit graph. Now for this one I hit zoom standard, so if yours looks a little bit different I would hit zoom, and then the number 6, that's our standard window, our 10 by 10 by negative 10 and negative 10. So it looks like standard window, that's what it'll look like. Now, the thing I want to point out with this graph is if you notice like the x plus 1, the x minus 1, the x plus 3, and look at each one of our intercepts here. So let me dot those intercepts for us. Now, here's what we have. For our first one over here on the left, that's paired up with our x plus 3. Now think about it. When we used to factor quadratics, we would solve for x. If I were to solve this guy here for x, if I were to set it equal to 0 and solve for x, I would get x equals negative 3, which is why it crosses at negative 3, not over at positive 3. So you kind of have to think opposite, but there's a reason for it. When we solve for x, that's what we get. So here, this one right here is paired up with our x plus 1, and then our x minus 1 is right here. Okay? So this goes with our x minus 1, because if I were to solve for x, I would get x equals 1. And for this one, if I were to solve for x in my x plus 1, I would get x equals negative 1. And this one, if I were to solve for x in the x plus 3, I would get x equals negative 3. So that's why they all work. And it's always going to work that way with the quadratic, with cubic, and with quartic. Let's try the next one. So we're going to go down to this bottom one here, the x times x plus 2 times x minus 4. So let's plug that in our calculator, and once you have that graph up, you should see something like this. I adjusted my window a little bit. I went down to negative 20, I believe, on my y min. So if you hit window and you adjust it, you go down to your y min and you type in negative 20. Make sure you're using the negative key, not the subtraction key. Then yours will look like mine. So basically our general shape of our graph looks like this. That's our general shape of our cubic function. Okay? Now notice how we have x plus 2 and it's going through the negative 2, because if I solve for x, it would go through the negative 2. Here we have x minus 4, it goes through positive 4. But here I have my x. You could think of that almost as x plus 0. If I were to solve for x, x would equal 0, and that's why we're going through the origin right there. Okay, so that's why we are heading right through the origin at this point. It's because of this guy right here. Alright, so now we're going to go in reverse here. We're given a graph of a cubic function. We want to find the equation. What I'm going to pay attention to are my x-intercepts. Okay, these three spots here. Nothing else. I'm not worried about this part up here, or my max, or my min. I'm worried about my x-intercepts. So those three spots there. So I'll have f of x equals, and if I'm looking at this one first, I'm going to have x plus 2. Then I'm going to have for this next one here x minus 1. And for my last one, I'm going to have x minus 3. So that's all I have to do. That's my equation right there. I use my x-intercepts, and we're good to go. So let's take a look at these two graphs. Let's plug both of them into our calculator. So feel free to pause the video, plug them in your calculator, and then when you're ready, hit play, and I'm going to go to what they're going to look like. So this is what I got for mine too. Now, if you remember from the last ones, our graph looked something like this. So in comparison, what you should be noticing is that the end behavior of these is that it rises left, but then it falls right. So I like to focus on just the right movement. So it's going to rise right if it's positive, but if I have a negative in front of my x cubed or a negative out in front here, it's going to fall to the right. So it's going to be going down and to the right. Whereas when it's positive, it's going up and to the right. It's rising right. If it's negative, it's falling right. Okay? And that's the case for all these cubic functions. Quartic's going to be different, but we'll get to that in a second. Alright, so if we want to try and write the equation here, why don't you try writing it down yourself, pause the video, and then I'm going to give you the answer in just a second. So for this one, it's actually the same as the one we had before, but now it's just a negative out in front. So I'm going to have x plus 2, x minus 1, and x minus 3. And that's what I get for my equation. But the most important part there is we have that negative out in front because it's going down and to the right. So, summary. Positive leading coefficient, that number out in front of the x cubed. If it's positive, it goes up and to the right. If it's negative, then it goes down and to the right. So I want you guys to use your calculators to find the general shape of these quartic functions. When I get to the next slide, I'm going to show you what I plugged in, and then we'll show you the graph. So feel free to pause it. So, plug this bad boy into our y equals, and this is what we should get for our graph. I believe I also made this one negative 20 for my y min, so if you want to adjust your window accordingly, feel free. So our general shape of our quartic functions is going to be a W like you see here. Now for the next one, when we had the negative out in front, this one right here, it looks like an M. This one looks a little bit kind of funky. It's not as symmetrical. Some of them are like that, some of them are not. Now another important thing to notice about this one is this right here. Notice how this goes through and this goes through. Okay, so this point here matches up with this right here, and then this one over here matches up with this right here. But this point here matches up with this one. And you'll notice the only difference between this one is squared. So, if it's just to the first power, it looks normal. Let's say it's x plus 5. That's one where it's going to go through the x-axis. And I would write this down. If it's x plus 5 and it's squared, it only touches the x-axis. Okay? Exciting stuff right there. So let's try and write the equation of this graph. Feel free to pause it if you think you know it, otherwise I'm going to go through it right now. So for this one, I have f of x equals, and it's positive because it's a w, x plus 2. That's for this first spot right here. Then it's x plus 1. And now once we get over here, this one right here is going to be x minus 1. And we're going to have x minus 2 for the last one. Okay, it's important to remember that this one right here goes to this spot right here. Whereas this one right here goes with this spot right here. Remember, you got to think opposite because you're solving for x. Alright, for this one here, you may notice we have the same x-intercepts, but now it's upside down. So it's our same equation, except this time when we have f of x, you're going to have negative, and then we're going to have x plus 2, x plus 1, x minus 1, and x minus 2. So that's the only difference with that one. So for quartic functions, remember we have that W shape. When it's positive, it's pointing up for both. So this is positive here. If it's negative, it's pointing down for both. So for these next one, we're going to graph these without your calculator. So feel free to pause at any time. I'm just going to go through them, but you can pause the video at any time and try them on your own. So for this first one, I have x plus 2, so that's going to give me a point at negative 2. The negative 1 is going to give me, or x minus 1 is going to give me a point at positive 1, and the x plus 4 is going to give me a point at negative 4. Now it's positive out in front. There's no negative sign right here, so I'm going up and to the right. So I'm going to start here, and it'll look something like this. Now make sure that you have the points, all three of these points here, because if you're a little bit off like I was here, I know that you meant to go right here, but we're all off sometimes. That's okay. But be very careful about putting the points exactly where you want them. Otherwise, I might think that you're between here and you don't really know what you're doing. All right, so this one has 4 terms, so it's quartic. It's going to be either an M or a W. Since we have the negative out here, we're going to be looking at an M. So let's plot the 3 points. We've got x plus 4, so it's going to be at negative 4. We have x minus 3, that's going to be at positive 3. We have x plus 1, it's going to be at negative 1. And we have x minus 2, that's going to be at positive 2. So I'm an M because it's negative, and I'm going to look something like this. Bibbidi boppity, we're good to go. Last one. This time we only have 3 terms, so it's cubic. Alright, so it's going to look either like this. That's if it's positive, or it's going to look like this. That's if it's negative. Well, this one is negative out in front. So I'm looking like this one right here. So I'm going to have a point at negative 5 because of the x plus 5. At positive 4 because of the x minus 4. And negative 1 because of the x plus 1. So my general shape of the graph, I know what the heck I'm doing now. Boom. I've got my cubic function graphed. Looking good. Alright, for homework you have a worksheet. It's labeled as such. A website, or you can get it from me in class.